Okay. Just a couple minutes. Okay, just another moment, and we'll all get started. Morning, Jeannie. Hey there. Hayla, Brian, Rory, welcome back, everybody. Hi, Sammy. Okay, guys, well, no time like the present, I guess, so let's get started. Good morning to everybody here. I see all you guys in the Zoom chat, and I'm also running on the YouTube live stream, as I have done a few other times. Welcome back. I hope you guys are having a good week so far, and today we have a pretty clear meeting plan. We're just going to go over the last group of fallacies that are talked about in our book. So there's 20 total that we're all going to learn, and we've already covered the first two groups, so we just have one more. One time really quick, I'm going to take my other computer here. I just want to look at something related to our class. Just a quick moment. Desktop to my left, and then you guys are the laptop to my right. Okay. Sorry, one second. Okay. Just pulling up the syllabus, making sure I'm clear on all these upcoming dates for us. Yes. So what we have to look forward to is your second homework assignment. Don't forget that's due Tuesday. We changed the due date around. So originally it was listed as due today, but as you guys know from the class announcement and then from me saying last time, I chose to give you through the weekend if you want to have extra time to finish it. So some people have submitted it already, but no rush. If you want to work on it, you have any time all the way up until beginning of class on Tuesday. So that second homework assignment, one more time, it's, I'll type it here. It's exercise 5-3 on page 151 of your workbook, and it's letters A through Z in that problem set. So just giving you a reminder about it. I know that you have other announcements that have been given on the same info, but that's what it is, just as a quick repetition. So yeah, anytime before Tuesday, you can turn that one in. After that, the next thing that we will have is a quiz that's next Thursday. So next Thursday we have a quiz on this chapter of 5 and all the topic of fallacies. So that quiz we will send out as we did before with the midterm, with the first quiz, and a week from today that'll be the next thing that you'll do in terms of a quiz. So next week it's like homework due on Tuesday, and then fallacy quiz on Thursday. So just keep those two things in mind. But we'll be meeting again, on Tuesday to remind you about the upcoming quiz, and we can probably review some of the information then too. But anyway, am I going to record this meeting? Yes, I will. Thank you. I'm doing YouTube, but let me record this as well. Lately, I've just kind of been posting the YouTube lectures because I feel like the viewer has a better image of me, and the ability to see the playback of the comments is nice. But I will record this, and if there's ever any reason anybody wants the Zoom version, you could simply send me a request for it, and I can mail it to you individually. But the same content, same recording. Okay. Yes, so I am recording it now, though. Thank you for the reminder. Now, back to our topics. And as usual, if you have any questions, comments, reaction to anything at all, you can let me know in either of the two chats. And I have both windows open on my screen, on my side. Okay, now what I'll start off with is just a little bit of a quick review of the fallacies of relevance. And don't forget, right, that those fallacies of relevance, the 8 that we learned on Tuesday, those are the kind that are used on the homework that's coming up. So the homework assignment is only devoted to kind of drilling your understanding of the fallacies of relevance. And good morning, everybody in the chat. I guess now that we're pretty much all assembled, go ahead if you want. Feel free to leave a comment. Most of you probably have. If you haven't done it, leave a comment in the chat, and that's your little attendance record as usual. Okay, so fallacies, that's what chapter 5 is all about. That's what we're talking about for the moment. Fallacies are when you have logically flawed arguments. When the argument has a logical flaw or an error in it, we call it a fallacious argument, or just say it is a fallacy. And those are bad arguments. We shouldn't be tricked by fallacies. We shouldn't be committing fallacies ourselves. But unfortunately, life isn't perfect, and people do make mistakes, and sometimes they commit these fallacies. So when they do, we want to know what they are so that we don't ourselves fall into those patterns or rely on weak or invalid arguments. So the fallacies of relevance is the second category that we learned about, to go beyond the fallacies of ambiguity that were learned last Thursday. So fallacies of relevance, just one more time. I don't know, let me see what you guys remember. Does anybody know the name of a couple of them that we studied on Tuesday? Just put those in the chat, and then whatever you put in there, I'll just evaluate and review it. There's 8 of them. Okay, red herring, that's one of them. Correct, Jacob. Kylie also, yes, straw man. So that's 2 out of 8. Let's get a few others if you guys know them. Once we see those names, then we can just do a quick review. Appeal to pity, okay, personal attack. Great, that's already a good range. Popular appeal, hasty generalization. All right, nice. Maybe there's only 1 or 2 more. What is left? Appeal to force, very good. And appeal to pity. Well, appeal to pity, you have it, Mihaela. There's 1 more, though, that no one's mentioned just yet. Appeal to ignorance. Okay, got it. And somebody said popular appeal. Okay, right. So let me just go up through these different concepts one time. So the personal attack fallacy, which is sometimes also called the ad hominem fallacy, that's the fallacy that happens when you don't like somebody's claim or argument, but instead of giving a logical response, a logical counter argument, you just attack the person in like a personal way. So somebody says, my belief is that abortion is morally permissible because bodily autonomy should supersede the rights of the fetus. And somebody else says, well, just look at you, you're just so poor, you don't have any money, so you're obviously not going to have any reasonable arguments, or like just anything that's unrelated, that's a personal sort of insult, or something about the person that's abusive, or something about the person that refers to their circumstances, like if you're Hispanic, then how can you ever make an argument about affirmative action because you're going to benefit from it, or I don't know, anything along those lines. So when you don't like a person's argument, you're supposed to form a response. You're supposed to challenge the evidence that they gave, or you're supposed to say that the evidence does not prove the claim that they're trying to use the evidence for. When you deviate from that and you get into personal attacks, that's an ad hominem, that's a fallacy, and we should be better than that. So after the personal attack fallacy, I guess we talked about I want to get my list properly set up here. Yeah, appeal to force. So appeal to force, sometimes they call it the scare tactic. That is when a person tries to get somebody to back down from their position or to accept yours by using force or at least threatening to use force. Force, broadly understood as either physical, but also legal, financial, emotional, things like that. So if somebody says to you, don't you ever disagree with me about climate change if you want to work at this company, or don't ever challenge my views on immigration or the economy if you want to live under this roof. Any such situation where a person tries to imply a threat or even a more overt threat, like if you keep talking this crazy talk about aliens, I might have to like attack you physically. Stuff like that. It's a scare tactic. It's not trying to make the case that the person is wrong. It's not saying why they are wrong if they are. Instead, it's just trying to use fear and intimidation to get the person to change their views. So that's not good either. Okay. And there was the, appeal to pity fallacy. Okay. With the appeal to pity fallacy, a person tries to rely on some kind of sympathy or special treatment from another person because they want them to feel sorry for them and feel pity for them. So I don't know, professor, please don't penalize my paper for being late because I just watched a really sad documentary and it's made me kind of emotional over the past few days. Or officer, don't give me the ticket because my friend's grandma just died and I've had to comfort her a lot, and therefore it's been a tough ride for me over the past few days. Whatever. Those are all given cases of appeal to pity. Sometimes, though, when a person wants to be treated in a sort of considerate way or to get some kind of favor bestowed on them, it's not always a fallacy. If, for example, the reason is legitimate and serious enough. So if a student says, I broke my leg and I can't, attend class, obviously that's not a real appeal to pity because it's a significant issue. So those are another couple of examples to that concept. Popular appeal. Popular appeal happens when a person tries to appeal to popular opinion to support their view. But obviously you need more reasons than just saying most people believe this, the majority believes it, or it's popular. If it deserves to be believed, then there should be a way of arguing for it that is unrelated to its popularity. So when people say things like, everyone buys these shoes, so they're the best, or, everyone owns this product, so it must be the best product. Those are cases of popular appeal. Okay, appeal to ignorance. It is when somebody claims something's true just because it hasn't been proven false. And that's also a fallacy. When you're trying to make a claim that something's true, you need evidence that supports the claim. You can't just say nobody has disproven it, except for the one exceptional case of like in law courts where we grant a presumption of innocence until proven guilty. But in everyday life, we don't say that the burden of proof is on whoever challenges your assertions. When you make a claim or you make an assertion, you have to come with proof. And if you just say nobody's proven otherwise, that's not the same thing as having your own proof. Okay, so like saying that aliens exist because you can't prove they don't, or ghosts exist because who could prove that they don't? Or on the other hand, they don't exist because you can't prove that they do. These would be cases of appeal to ignorance. Okay, so then there's hasty generalization, which is when a person draws a conclusion of a general kind, but they do it off of a set of evidence or examples that are not enough or that are just not representative. So a generalization is an all statement, like saying all crows are black, just to give you an example of one, but there's all kinds of others. Some people say all men are dogs, or, all women aren't loyal, or, all children are, impatient or something. But anyway, these are generalized statements. The problem with hasty generalization is somebody makes one of those statements, but the evidence they use is limited. Like, one dog bit you, and so you say all these dogs are brutal, or, one professor was rude, and you're like, all these professors are mean people or whatever. So yeah, hasty generalization. You draw a sweeping conclusion from a limited set of cases or cases that don't reflect the mainstream of other cases. Then there was the straw man. So the straw man fallacy is when you take your opponent's actual argument and then you try to distort it so that it's almost easier to rebut or to reject. So like if a person said, we should probably not use so many genetically modified crops, and then someone says, oh, so you think we shouldn't grow plants? I mean, that's insane. How could we eat? That's not what they said, though. That would be a straw man. Somebody says that I believe, here you go. So someone says, I believe in a woman's right to choose because the fetus doesn't have the status of a full human being with the right to life. And then somebody comes back and says, okay, so what you're saying basically is like people should be allowed to just kill children, little babies that are, out there, in kindergarten. That's a horrifying way to live or to believe. But they didn't say that, their views being exaggerated and made to sound worse so that you can attack that version of what they said instead of the real argument. Okay. There's also red herring. So just one last piece of review. The red herring fallacy happens when you try to distract from the main topic of the conversation or argument by bringing up a different issue. So like if somebody said, climate change is real, there's all kinds of evidence for it, what do you say? And you're like, no, I don't agree, because look, the real problem in this world is terrorism, or the real problem in this world is, immigration problem or something. But these are unrelated issues. And so you can't debunk one of them by just bringing up a separate topic that's not related to it. Okay, guys, so that's my just first opening statements here to kind of remind us about the topics from last time. But we've got one more category of fallacies then that we're going to go over now today. And what they're called are fallacies of unwarranted assumptions. So here we go. Okay, so there's our term, fallacies of unwarranted assumption. And basically, the definition of the concept, the category of fallacies here, is just one little quick direct message. Just wanted to knock that out. Okay, no problem. Yeah, so fallacies of unwarranted assumption. They're called fallacies of unwarranted assumption because they contain assumptions that are not supported by the evidence. Okay, so I'll give you that. Okay, there we go. You can see the definition. Fallacies of unwarranted assumption. When an argument includes an assumption that's not supported by evidence. So the word unwarranted means not justified. So these are fallacies which happen because somebody is making an assumption in the way they state their argument or claim. But this assumption is not based on any evidence that they actually have. So it's not warranted. It's not justified. So let's go and talk about what the different names of these fallacies of unwarranted assumption are. So there are 7 of them total. And I'm going to first just list the names one by one, and then we'll go through each one, give definitions, and talk about the examples. So fallacies of unwarranted assumption include, one is called begging the question. Okay, and then there's also inappropriate appeal to authority. Appeal to authority. And then we have a third one, which is called loaded question. Loaded question. Okay, and then there is false dilemma. False dilemma fallacy. Then we've got the questionable cause fallacy. Questionable cause. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Got 2 more. Next, it's slippery slope. Slippery slope. And one more, last but not least, it's called the naturalistic fallacy. All right, so there we have our 8 different, sorry, I meant to say 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fallacies of unwarranted assumption. Now, if you add up all the amount of fallacies we've learned so far, there are 5 fallacies of ambiguity plus 8 fallacies of relevance, and now we have 7 of these, so 5, 8, 7 adds up to 20. 20 in total that we just all want to be aware of, but today our main focus is these 7 here. So let us just go ahead and talk about the first one mentioned, which is the begging the question fallacy. Okay, so with begging the question, the problem with this type of argument is that one of the premises of the argument is just a slightly reworded version of the conclusion. So essentially, the conclusion and one premise say the same information, and that's what some call a circular argument. But let me write the definition, and then we'll talk a little more. So begging the question. There you go. So it just says, taking the question, when one of the premises of the argument is just a reworded version of the conclusion. So as an example, what if somebody says this? So here's an example that was given in the book. Someone's argument has this premise. The premise is that it is immoral okay, so the premise is just that it is immoral to inflict death as a penalty for a crime. And so the conclusion is, therefore, capital punishment is wrong. Now, let's just look at this argument and study it for a second. It's just got one premise that leads to the conclusion, but what's going on with these statements? First of all, what is capital punishment? Does anybody know that? Let's ask. Let's see if anyone has a view on or general knowledge. Capital punishment. It's what type of thing? It's execution, right? It's the death penalty. So, a person commits a capital crime, one of the most grave penalties that we have, well, the worst, I guess, penalty we have in our legal system is the death penalty. Capital punishment is just a sort of legal term for that. So, what do you think it means for something to be wrong? What's another synonym for the word wrong? There's many ways to say wrong. One of the ways is to say that something that's wrong is what? Well, yes, John, sort of, but I was hoping that you'd notice the stated premise there, which says it is immoral to inflict death as a penalty for a crime. So what is the premise really saying? It's saying that it is immoral, in other words, wrong, to inflict death penalty on people, which is capital punishment. So it really says this, if you break it down, it's saying that capital punishment is wrong, therefore capital punishment is wrong. Eric, same thing I was saying before to John. I'm trying to make the point that the word wrong is synonymous with immoral in the specific argument that I wrote here above. That's the reason that the premise is a reworded version of the conclusion, because these are different words, but they have the same meaning. So if I tell you that capital punishment is wrong because it's not right, that's not giving different information to support the conclusion. It's just repeating the statement with a slight different linguistic form. You understand that? So let me ask you if you can come up with one. Suppose that I say to you that the conclusion of the argument is that abortion is wrong. What would be a equivalent statement to that would be given in a circular argument, in a begging the question argument? So someone says abortion is wrong, and you're like, okay, why though? And they give you this reason. Can you write a reason that is not different from that statement? Abortion is immoral. There you go, Eileen. You could have even made it a little more clever. You could say ending your pregnancy is immoral, or you know what I mean? So like imagine this argument. Termination of pregnancy is immoral, therefore abortion is wrong. I mean, there could be good arguments, and there are some good arguments that abortion is wrong. There's also good arguments that it's not wrong. But this is not one of them, because the premise, which is supposed to be evidence that supports the conclusion, just is the conclusion. So how can a person make an argument like abortion's wrong, therefore abortion's wrong? You'd have to give some independent grounds for believing that that conclusion is true. And I mean, you could give such an argument. You could say whatever, like a fetus has a future like ours that it could experience if it was not aborted, and it's wrong to kill something that has a future like ours, therefore abortion is wrong. But that doesn't just say it's wrong because it's wrong. It gives some kind of additional reasoning to support the claim. It'd be like if somebody said, you know, the Lakers are the best team in basketball, and then you ask them, what's the argument you have? I would love to know your sort of sports argument for that claim. And they say to you, okay, well, I'll tell you exactly why, because look at all 30 teams. All the other teams are worse. So therefore, the Lakers are the best. Do you guys understand how that's a circular argument, how that begs the question and it's just the same info? Because to say that a team is best is equivalent to saying that all the other teams are worse. So if you say they're the best because the other teams are not as good, you haven't told us why you think they are the best. I mean, you could make reasonable arguments for that claim if you really wanted to. You could say, well, they have some great personnel. They have, you know, all these stars and all-stars and Hall of Famers, and, you know, they've got a bunch of championships in the past. So historically, they're a very successful franchise, and therefore they're the best team. But you couldn't just say they're the best because they're the best. Otherwise, you're not offering any real reasons. And as you guys know, a conclusion is supposed to be something that is proven by the premises. But if the premises just are the conclusion, then the argument goes in a circle, which is why they sometimes do call this the circular argument fallacy. Here's one that's also in the book that I thought was kind of interesting, so I'll use it for the moment. Imagine this argument. It says, the Bible says that God exists, therefore God exists. Okay. And I want to make sure I don't lose all these things that I've put in the other chat. So let me just quickly do a little copying and pasting. Sorry, just 1 second. I'm kind of like messing with my fingers here. Didn't touch the keys the right way. So anyway, that's the example of the abortion argument given to the YouTube chat. And now I'm just going to copy the one I did here. When I do it while I'm typing, it's a little faster. I just kind of lost track for a second. Not to worry, though. Okay, but anyway, that gave us some time to look at the current argument, or at least think about it in our mind. And now I want us to take attention to this new one that's about God. So what the argument concludes is that God exists. But look at the premises, and let's see if anybody can tell me, out of those two premises given, which one already assumes that the conclusion is true? Like one of those premises already has to imply that God does exist. Which one? It is the first one, right? Yes, Jeannie and Lisa. Because the first one says that who wrote the Bible? It says God wrote the Bible. But of course, in order to write something, the thing has to exist. So the argument really begs the question because it assumes its conclusion in the first premise. Again, premises are supposed to be evidence for a conclusion, but they're not supposed to be the conclusion. So the first premise says that God wrote the Bible, implying that he exists. So the form of the argument is essentially God exists, therefore God exists. And I think I've probably given this example before when we talked about popular appeal. Somebody just says God exists because most people believe in him. But here again, this is a fallacy involving an argument that tries to prove the existence of God. But nonetheless, there are good arguments that God does exist that can be given. But this is not one of them because this one's circular. So that's just another example there. So anyway, we want to make sure that we don't get tricked by these fallacies that are begging the question fallacies. Sometimes they happen when a key term is reworded in a premise. So like if I say, I don't know, going to school is a waste of time, and therefore, completing your education is just not the best use of your life or something, that would be a circular argument because completing your education is the same thing as going to school. And saying that something's a waste of time is the same as saying that it's not going to do anything for you in your life or whatever. It's just going to waste something about your energy or whatever. So that would be another circular argument. You have to give some kind of reason towards the conclusion in order for it to support the conclusion. So it's sometimes called begging the question because if you have a premise that is the same as the conclusion, the question remains, why is this conclusion true? We're still waiting for a real reason that is something different from just repeating the claim. So that's, I think, everything I wanted to tell you about the begging the question fallacy. Here's the book. It just says, in begging the question, the conclusion is simply a rewording of a premise. By making our conclusion the same as the premise, we are assuming the conclusion is true rather than trying to prove it. This is sometimes known as circular reasoning. Begging the question sometimes takes the form of the conclusion being a definition of key term in the premises. They give the capital punishment example, the God example. So it says the begging the question fallacy can be very frustrating if we fail to recognize it, since there's no way to disprove the person's conclusion if we accept the premise. Now, if you think an argument contains this fallacy, try reversing the conclusion and the premise to see if the argument says essentially the same thing. Okay, so you got to be willing and able to call people out if they commit the begging the question fallacy. Sometimes it has the outward appearance on the surface of being, a good argument, but at the end of the day, there's no evidence given in such an argument. Okay. So that's fine. Let's go ahead then and talk about inappropriate appeal to authority. So the inappropriate appeal to authority fallacy is pretty straightforward. It's just when you appeal to the view of a so-called authority to support your claim, but this person is not knowledgeable about that topic. This person is not an expert or an authority in that field. So okay. So there you see our definition. It's inappropriate appeal to authority. One appeals to another person's view in order to support their conclusion, but this person is not an authority in the field that is being discussed. So, this is happening a lot, I guess, right now, unfortunately, in the pandemic world that we're living in. Somebody might say something like this to you. So I was talking the other day to my auto mechanic. he was fixing my car, and he was telling me that these vaccines kill people. So therefore, these vaccines are deadly. Now, what's the issue, you think, with that example of an argument? No disrespect to people that are good with cars, but just for the sake of discussion, right? What's wrong with that example? Person says their auto mechanic told them vaccines are bad and they're dangerous, they kill people, so that's therefore, therefore they are. What is the reason that that's an inappropriate appeal to authority? Go ahead, just let me know. It's not a medical professional, doesn't have the proper background for his opinion to be evidence. So this is a person who has expertise and knowledge on a different subject matter. If the person's an auto mechanic, then yes, you could definitely refer to their views if they told you something about how a car works or maybe a diagnostic problem with whatever your car is going through. But it's not the type of person that you should refer to in a discussion of, public health, medicine, or science. Now, if you have the view of a, scientific, public health, medical professional, then you can say that this is a valid use of their authority to support your conclusion. But people sometimes look to those that have views that are not at all knowledgeable on the subject that they're trying to form conclusions about. Sometimes people do this with their parents, right? Someone's like, yeah, well, my dad told me or my mom told me that, there's no such thing as climate change. So therefore there isn't. But unless this person's parent is, like a climatologist, meteorologist, a person that's well versed in the scientific literature, then that would not be the proper authority to refer to. I mean, I'm sure you love your parents, but a lot of these parents don't know a lot about everything. So you got to look to the parents only in the concepts and areas where they're, expert or at least knowledgeable on the subject. Let me give you some examples in the book on the same thing. My priest says genetic engineering is not safe, therefore all experimentation on genetic engineering should be stopped. As the book says, unless your priest also happens to be an expert in genetic engineering, before accepting his argument as correct, you should ask him for evidence for his assertion. Young children sometimes look to their parents as authorities, even in areas where their parents have little or no knowledge. Sometimes people will appeal to the view of like a popular celebrity or whoever, but the problem is that the celebrity is not knowledgeable about the thing that they're talking about. I don't know, if a celebrity makes an ad for milk, says drink milk, gives strong bones, you might not know whether or not this person really knows what they're talking about, because are they a nutritionist? Do they know anything about diet? And therefore, it could be, again, in case of an inappropriate appeal to authority fallacy. As they say here, we often find this fallacy in advertisements where celebrities are used to promote products. For example, Lady Gaga and Tony Bennett team up in a holiday ad for Barnes & Noble, while NBA star Blake Griffin appears in an ad for Kia cars. Olympic swimmer Michael Phelps appears in ads for milk. In none of these cases are the celebrities authorities on these products, and yet people accept their words simply because they're experts in a different field. So if you wanted to have tips on, swimming and, proper athletic conditioning, then definitely, I guess, Michael Phelps would be someone you'd talk to. But I don't know if he'd be the first person to think of in a discussion of how to manage your diet. Famously, Michael Phelps, he eats a lot of food, or he did while he was training for these Olympic runs that he was doing. But that's not necessarily something that can be applied to every individual. Yeah, sometimes because people have expertise or credibility on one subject area, then they're falsely used as an authority in other areas where they're not. Like say a politician says something that's contrary to science, and you refer to their view as something that gives support for their conclusion. This person's not a scientist. They're just as uninformed as any other average citizen. Or as an example, maybe relating to people like me, when we have distinguished titles like doctor, professor, lieutenant, officer, president, whatever, sometimes people think that gives general credibility to everything the individual says, even if it's not in their area of knowledge. So if you said to someone when you go home later, yeah, Professor Dr. Vulich, he was telling me that helium is one of the heaviest elements in the whole periodic table, so therefore that's true, that would be the wrong person to look to, because I'm not a chemist and I don't know a lot about chemistry. I know that helium is one of the lighter elements. I guess I at least know that. But famously, I was very bad at chemistry. That was my worst subject ever throughout my whole education. So it just didn't stick. I just had a real hard time with it. But anyway, I'm very knowledgeable and skilled when it comes to the ways of philosophy, logic, the history of philosophy, and all these different arguments. Therefore, if you're talking about that stuff, you could cite my expertise. But not in an area where I'm out of my depth and don't know. It says that here, uniforms and distinguished titles like doctor, professor, president, or lieutenant can serve to reinforce the mistaken perception that people who are experts in one field must be knowledgeable in others. This is sometimes called the halo effect. So anyway, to avoid inappropriate appeal to authority, just check on the expert's credentials in the field before you cite their testimony as authoritative evidence. All right. So then we can continue. What's next for us is the loaded question. Okay, loaded question. So the loaded question fallacy is, I think, easy to understand. It's simply when a person asks a question, right? But they ask a question that assumes something that the person doesn't know. So let me write that out. Okay. Loaded question fallacy. So again, one asks a question, but they're asking a question that assumes an answer to a different question that they didn't ask. Therefore, it's a loaded question built on assumptions that are not to be taken for granted. Like, what if a person just comes up to you and says, like, who are you dating right now? That could be a loaded question if they don't know you very well, because what's the assumption behind the question? That you're dating somebody, right? And it's just a question of who the identity of the person is. But if they don't know that you have a partner or whatever, then that's a loaded question. So they would you can't answer the question in a straightforward way if the assumption is false. You can't just be like, well, here's who I'm dating. Instead, you'd have to be like, I'm sorry, but the assumption behind your question is not even correct. That's a loaded question. You're asking who I'm dating, but I'm not dating anybody. Or if like somebody said, I don't know, when's the first time that you drank alcohol? You maybe never have tried it. And if you haven't, then that's a loaded question too. Or if somebody says like, I don't know, when did you lose your virginity or something? Or here's one. Like, let me think about it. It's like an assumption about your family or something. So someone asks you, where did your mom and dad meet or something, supposing that you even know your mom and dad. Maybe you grew up in an adopted home, or maybe you grew up in the custody of other people, or like what did your mom and dad do for their anniversary last year or something, supposing that they're still together. They might not be. So these are, again, loaded questions. I don't know if you guys have any examples of your own that you can throw out there. Sometimes we've heard these, or we've accidentally asked a few of them. And if you have anything to throw out that you think fits this idea, then just go ahead and let us see in the chat. And while you're thinking of that, I'll refer to some other examples in the book here. Sometimes loaded questions can be asked by people that want to try and get you to confess to something that you didn't do, or to, like, I don't know, elicit information that they are not privy to. So like sometimes I've heard it said that in courts of law, lawyers can ask questions that are leading questions, and those are loaded questions. So like they say to the person that's giving testimony, who has claimed they're not guilty, they say, look, sir, why don't you just tell us, why did you do it? Just tell us and the jury right now for the first time, why did you commit the crime? But asking the question why you did it, if you're saying you didn't, is a loaded question, because it's assuming the case of guilt. And then the only question is what's motive. But if there's no guilt in the first place and you didn't do it, then you can't answer this question in a straightforward way. Let's see. Do you think the death penalty should only be for people that are older than 18? Now, let me ask you, if you hear that question, what's the assumption in the question that maybe is not known by the person asking it? Do you think that the death penalty should only apply to people that are above 18? Yeah. Oh, how are your parents doing? Parents are divorced. Yeah, there you go. Which ones? Interesting. Yeah, so that's kind of what I was thinking about, the earlier example. In this current example about death penalty, the question was, do you think the death penalty should be only for people that are older than 18? Now, what is an assumption built into that question? Do you think it should only be for people 18 and up? What's the assumption there? Just trying to quickly test on your ability to comprehend this. This is an example from the book, so I'm just giving you that. But let me ask it, and go ahead and give me your best answer. Do you think the death penalty should only be applied to people that are 18 and over? This question assumes that the person believes the death penalty should even exist. That's right, Lisa. So suppose a person has moral opposition to the death penalty, like our own governor, Gavin Newsom, who has put a moratorium on the penalty in our whole state. And, even President Biden believes that death penalty is wrong, as many Catholic people do, which he is. So some people just don't believe that it's right for the state to put people to death, as we were kind of hinting at in an earlier example of another fallacious argument. But this question, anyway, assumes something about the person that might not be true, which is that they have general support, and the only remaining issue is what's the minimum eligibility you think there should be. Okay? Here's one that it happened one time in my own life, and it was definitely an embarrassing thing, and it taught me a lesson, because I was hanging out with some friends when I was a really young kid, and we were hanging out at one of our friends' mom's house, or his house. His mom was there, and one of the friends with us that didn't know this mother very well saw her just kind of come and say, "Hey, how are you guys doing?" And he asked her this question. He said, "Oh, wow, so like when is the baby due?" But she was not pregnant. It's just he's kind of like, he has no way body shaming kind of. So there again is a loaded question, and sometimes people talk about like assuming one's gender or whatever, like stuff like that, like I don't know, I'm trying to think of a proper example of how that could be a loaded question. Maybe if somebody asks yeah, like they yeah, sometimes it's tough on the spot, but this is one that's certainly like in the air in our current culture. If I see a masculine or a feminine name, and then I ask the person like, "Oh, something that the question implies that they have a more masculine or feminine identity," could be a loaded question. But I'm having a little bit of a hard time stimulating my thought on it. Can anybody sort of maybe give me a little helping hand? What do you think could be a question that makes an assumption about, say, gender or identity that is not known? I mean, I guess one could just be who are you dating assumes that the person even has like sexual interests for people. If they were like asexual or something, then that would, I guess, be one example of that. But that's more about orientation than gender. Um, let's see. What about like who is she, but they don't identify as female? Okay, there you go. That's a clear example, Lisa. Yeah. You see someone hanging out with another person, and the question is, oh yeah, who's that girl that was chilling with? Who's that girl that when she walked in the room that you were hanging out with? And you'd have to say, I'm sorry, but yeah, it's not the way the person identifies and wants to be labeled. Or like, who are you dating? And then what is his or her name, assuming the person's straight? Yeah, there you go. That's another good case. So the person says, yeah, I've got a partner and we're really going strong. And you're like, oh yeah, who is she if it's a guy? Or who is he if it's a girl? And you might maybe don't know that they have that they're gay or whatever, that they have a different orientation. What college did you go to? That's another interesting example, Jeannie. Maybe the person hasn't gone to college, or maybe they didn't graduate and someone asks, what is your degree in? Okay, so anyway, we have to be really careful and be a little bit patient when we're talking to people and asking them questions. Make sure that you don't assume anything in the way you ask questions. Take things one at a time. Instead of asking the person, who are you dating, then just say, do you have a relationship with somebody? And then we can proceed from there to find out what the answer to that is and ask further questions on the basis of the info that we get. Okay. Cool. So those loaded questions, I think that makes good sense. And so we're going to move ahead then to the false dilemma. So false dilemma fallacy is basically when somebody tries to like reduce the responses to a complicated issue just down to two binary choices. So YouTube chat, just pasting it over there. Okay, so false dilemma, everybody. A person reduces the responses to a complex issue to a binary either or choice. Right. So what if somebody asks you like, or says to you, where do you stand? Do you stand with the radical, right, or are you like a hardcore left liberal? Which one are you? That's perhaps a false dilemma because it ignores what possibilities. It's giving them only these two sort of very polarized options in terms of a response, but it ignores the fact that there's what? The other parties. Well, there's other parties, and there's just also other political ideologies that are sort of more in the middle, right? Moderates that don't necessarily think that either side is correct, but that they maybe both have reasonable points at times. You know, it's a case where there's more than two options, but they're being presented as though there's only two. Or what if somebody says to you, "Are you a Republican or a Democrat?" Now, in that case, that ignores the fact that there's a lot of other parties. There's independents. Yeah, it's kind of like a loaded question, right, Kylie? But the little distinction here is that you're given two options when there's more than two. In generic loaded questions, it might be that there's just one thing that the person assumes. But in these examples of false dilemma, there's more than two possible responses, but the person only allows you those. Like, what if somebody says, "Look, what's up? Do you love me or do you hate me? Like, what's the attitude that you have towards me? Is it love or is it hate?" How's that a false dilemma, a false choice? It makes it seem as though the person has to either love or hate, but of course, there's what other options besides? Let me know that. Aside from love and hate, you could just what? Well, be annoyed, I guess, is one, but it could also just be like you don't have any real like powerful feelings. It's just indifference. Yeah, that's right, Lisa. You just kind of are neutral. Um, so yes, Alex, correct. So in some cases, people want to make things seem overly simplistic, like there's only two possibilities, um, and there's more. Me, for example, I'm neither Republican or Democrat. Just to let you know, I'm declined a state voter, so I've always been unaffiliated with any of the political parties, which is nice because then I get to kind of vote in different primaries. But but yeah, I think there's good ideas sometimes on either side. Anyways, that's just one little random biographical fact. What about this? This is a classic false dilemma. Someone says, "America, love it or leave it. Where do you stand?" Now, how is that a false dilemma? Between loving it or leaving it, what's a different option that's in between either one? Love it or leave it. How is that a false choice? What other things are possible besides either of those? Tolerating, sure. There you go, Kayla. That's one way to put it. I would think of it sort of as like not necessarily loving everything about it, but also not wanting to leave, just staying where you're at and raising those criticisms when they're fair. And I've always found that that's a kind of weird thing for people to say, love it or leave it. I mean, if you live in a democratic system like us, then the actual value of that is that you can make criticisms without fear of being somehow persecuted. That's because we are free to express ourselves and our political views. So loving it or leaving it is to make it seem as though there's only two very stratified options there, when in fact there's a whole range of intermediate possibilities. Um, and like sometimes people will, this can contribute to like negative attitudes that people have about themselves. Like they think in terms of just either or, like they're very binary in their thinking. Sometimes if a person has, say, like an eating disorder, right, then they're caught up in a false dilemma, thinking that either they're super emaciated, like anorexic thin, or if that's not the case, they feel like they're just totally too large and they have a like way too big of a body. But they obviously are ignoring the fact that there's just a healthy body weight that's in between these two extremes, and they're kind of caught up in only seeing it as just a black and white extreme set of two options. Sometimes polls and surveys that are conducted can commit this fallacy, and when they do, then we shouldn't necessarily rely so much on the results of the poll that is conducted. So as an example, here's one from the book. It says, pollsters may commit this fallacy. How options are presented in a question can influence the response. For example, in one survey, people were asked, do you feel that the courts deal too harshly with criminals or not harshly enough? When only given these two options, 6% said too harsh, 78% said not harshly enough. But when a third option was given, do not have enough information to say, 30% chose that answer, and only 60% said not harshly enough. So you would have had like a false picture of the distribution of public opinion if you had relied on the initial survey that only gave 2 options instead of more. So anyway, try to avoid the fallacy of false dilemma. When people try to put you on the spot and say, which one is it? Is it A or B? And there's more than those. Then instead of answering the question and getting kind of roped into one of the false choices, you should instead say to the person, no, that's a false dilemma. You're really kind of making it seem as though there's no other possible options here, but there are. Okay, and if neither alternative is satisfactory, sometimes you should just say, I'm not sure. But at any rate, we can commit this fallacy at times. It's sometimes called false choice. It's also sometimes called false dichotomy. But in any ways, our book goes with that label of false dilemma. Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to see. And we frequently find this type of fallacious reasoning in all or nothing thinking. For example, bulimics regard eating in terms of either getting fat or binging and then vomiting to stay thin. And they simply don't see moderation as a viable alternative. Okay. I don't know if you guys have any other examples on this. If you do, love to hear them and see what you've got. But I guess while you're thinking and gathering your thoughts, I'll start to give us our notes on the next concept. So which car do you like, Ferrari or Lamborghini? There you go. There's many more cars, even more cool sports cars than those. Chocolate or vanilla, right? What do you drink, Coke or Pepsi? Obviously, there's more than that. I kind of like Dr. Pepper and root beer and stuff, even more than either of those two. So, yeah, these are good examples, guys. Thanks. And I guess from there, we can continue to talk about the questionable cause. Yeah, so that's the next one, questionable cause. Okay, so questionable cause is just when a person assumes that one thing is the cause of another thing without good evidence to support that. Okay. Okay, so questionable cause. When one assumes without very good reason or evidence that one thing is the cause of another thing. So like examples of questionable cause, oftentimes this happens because people like to try and draw connections between things, even when there's no connection. And oftentimes questionable cause happens simply because one event occurred first in time, and then the other thing occurred after that in time. And that is like the only reason that somebody says that like A must have caused B, just because it came before it. Just because one thing occurs prior to another in time does not mean it's the cause of that other thing. And so a lot of superstitious beliefs and things fall within this category here. Let me give you some examples. Suppose someone's just taking a nice walk and they see a little black cat that just crosses their path. And then later on in that same day, I don't know, they get into a minor car accident and it's a big hassle for them and it's very annoying and frustrating. Now, maybe if that happened, this person, according to their way of thinking, makes what connection? What caused what? It's questionable, but the person might say this thing is the cause of the other. Which do you think I'm hinting towards? The black cat caused the accident, right? Because this black cat crossed my path. You've heard the black cat crossing your path is bad luck. And, sure enough, later on in that same day, I got into this little fender bender. So I'm thinking that the black cat crossing my path was the reason that occurred. But come on, guys, you know for sure that that's not the cause, and that's certainly at least questionable, because these are two events happening in completely different parts of space and time. And if that was really true, that the black cat crossing your path caused bad luck, then what about all the people that own black cats? Like I have a lot of friends that do. They would be suffering from constant bad luck, and this is just simply not true. Furthermore, it's also kind of harmful to the case of adopting these black cats, because statistics show that they are actually adopted at lower rates for whatever reason. But they're great animals, just like any other color. So, that's one example. A person steps on a crack on the sidewalk, a big, open part of the road. And then, yeah, black cats are great. I have some friends with really cute ones, but they step on this crack, right? And then their mother calls them like later in the day or texts them and is like, hey, I need you to help me get to the hospital because I've slipped and fallen in the kitchen and I think I may have hurt my back really bad. So mom's back breaks and, you stepped on the crack earlier, so maybe you've heard the children's nursery rhyme, right? That's what caused it. Step on a crack, break your mother's back. But obviously, guys, if that was true, then everyone's mother's back would have been broken at some point, because there's no way to avoid these cracks in general throughout your life. And again, it'd just be a foolish assessment of cause and effect, because the real cause is whatever locally was happening to her when she happened to have fallen. So questionable causes, guys, all around. Superstition is often based on this fallacy. You wear like a certain, I don't know, t-shirt or pair of socks, and then the professor canceled class on a day that you like weren't prepared to take a quiz, and you're like, yes, I knew it. These lucky socks, man. That's why he canceled his class. Meanwhile, though, this professor has never seen you or your socks at all, and it's just canceling a course for their own reasons. People like to sometimes think that there are mysterious connections between things that can't be proven with any type of evidence, and it would just be unwise for us to persist in that way of thinking when we can actually find the real evidence and cause for the events that do happen. Here's one more example, I guess, while we're just on the topic. So you guys have heard of Jennifer Lopez, I'm sure, J-Lo, as they call her sometimes, the actress and singer. Her mother, one time, she actually won a huge jackpot playing slot machines at a casino in Atlantic City. And it's kind of crazy because already they're really rich, but she won $2 million playing slots. Anyway, after she won, she recounted the story, and she said that right before she pulled the slot machine lever, she said like a little good luck charm to Our Lady of Guadalupe. And because of that, she thought that that's what caused her to win. But obviously, if that was the cause of winning, saying a good luck charm or incantation right before you pull the lever or whatever, push the button, then in that case, you could systematically win, and people would therefore win all the time, and the house would not have better odds. So the casinos would lose their ability to be profitable and all the rest. So we owe it to ourselves to be a little bit more scrutinizing over cause and effect claims. We shouldn't just assign causes when something happens first if there's no better evidence that it was actually the direct reason for something to occur. And yeah, sometimes we like to think that we have more control over the world than we really do, and that could sometimes lead us to have these kind of false assessments of cause and effect. Maybe I will just give you one more, okay? So Babe Ruth, you've heard of Babe Ruth probably. I'm thinking he's just a well-known historic figure. He's a baseball player of the earlier 20th century. Well, anyway, he used to play for the, let me get this right. Okay, yeah. So Babe Ruth was sold by the Boston Red Sox to the New York Yankees in 1920, and he did not like being traded, and so he was really pissed at the Boston Red Sox. So he said, "I'm putting a curse on them." And then actually, they didn't make the World Series. They didn't win the World Series for like 80 years until finally 2004. And like a lot of people, would say, "Oh, it's the curse of Babe Ruth." The Bambino, the Babe. He put the curse on them, and then it's 80 years of futility. But obviously, the real reasons that they failed could not possibly have been a curse like that. Otherwise, we could just choose to curse whichever team we like and then cause their failure systematically or reliably. Yeah, and when they did finally win in 2004, I believe it was like a historic comeback because they were down 0-3, which never had been a deficit that a team had overcome before. It still hasn't happened in the NBA, but we'll see if ever that does happen. I'm sort of surprised at 75 years of playoff matchups. Well, I guess it hasn't been a 4-game series format, but anyway, sports talk. So we can continue, guys, moving on. The next one to talk about is what's called slippery slope. And then it's really just, yes, 2 more, slippery slope and then 1 more. So here we go. So the slippery slope fallacy happens when it's kind of this false idea that if one type of action is either taken or permitted, then eventually all actions of that type will be either taken or permitted. Okay. Right, so there you see slippery slope, the erroneous, meaning like in error. The erroneous idea that if one type of action is taken or permitted, then eventually all actions that are like of that type will either be taken or permitted. So imagine that somebody says, watch out, that you have a child, and this child is asking you, begging you to give him a candy bar at the grocery store. But I'm telling you, don't give in, because if you give in to them while they're making this, request, then someday down the line they'll develop a habit that they'll never be able to be said no to, and they'll never be able to wait for things. They'll never learn patience, and so you're going to spoil this child, and they're going to grow up to be a completely like lazy, unproductive member of society as an adult. So don't give them the one candy bar. It's not necessarily true, though, that this one decision made on a given day is going to lead to this full-blown loss of self-control and all the rest that was mentioned in the example. So that's a slippery slope fallacy. If we allow one of these actions, or one of these actions is taken, then it's going to compound in the future, getting worse and worse and worse. With slippery slope, you're supposed to think of this kind of visual metaphor. Imagine a person standing on top of like a high hill, right? And there's like a steep slope that goes down. And you're basically telling the person, hey, don't even take one step, because if you take one step off of your current position at the top, it's not going to stop with the one step. You're going to lose your footing because the slope is slippery. And so that one step is going to become you falling down the whole mountain and incurring a worse and worse series of injuries as you inevitably descend to the bottom. So don't take the one step, pretty much, because it's a warning that if you do, further negative consequences are going to follow from the one step. But a lot of times in life, these are false assumptions. That's why this is another unwarranted assumption fallacy. Like, say that somebody claims this. I'm really worried about people developing artificial intelligence with the computers and stuff, because, it may seem like it's fun and games today, but eventually, what do you think is the slippery slope here? What are we putting ourselves on a slippery slope to if we develop strong artificial intelligence? That, according to the fallacy, will lead us on a path to eventually having what? Artificial intelligence, you guys talking about computers, computer programming, computers that kind of think and solve problems. Why would a person worry about that? Oh yeah, because they'll take over. There you go. It's going to become the Terminator. It's going to, eventually enslave humanity when they become sentient, when they realize that we're, expendable. So don't pursue this technology. If you do, that's bound to happen. Again, no, not necessarily. I mean, if there's evidence for that, I guess, but the evidence can't just be some overhyped dystopian, pessimistic prediction of the direction that the technology could go in. Like sometimes people will say, let us not have government subsidies for, I don't know, childcare or for whatever, because if people receive a government kickback for having kids, then eventually no one's going to want to work. They're just going to have a bunch of kids and receive welfare payments. And so society is going to be destroyed by, giving people a little help. There's no actual evidence from the policies that have been instituted along those lines that that's the result. But it's a slippery slope argument that kind of makes a person fearful of trying those policies. Yeah, they kind of are like chain arguments, actually, Oscar, except they're like chains that lead you in a bad direction. So I remember there's an ad a few years ago for some kind of insurance product, and I don't remember the exact name of the company or what the specifics were, but it was like, hey, if you don't buy our insurance, then one day you're going to run out of gas on the road, and when you run out of gas on the road, then you're going to end up, like hitchhiking, and then when you have to hitchhike, someone's going to take you and drop you in a ditch, and so don't end up in a ditch. Buy our insurance. So sometimes advertisers will use these kind of slippery slope fallacies to induce your fear of not buying their product, whatever it might be. Let's see. Yeah, so it says in the book, government bailouts will encourage businesses to be irresponsible, take absurd risks. If we allow them, we will end up having to bail out every business in the nation until we end up under communism. Yeah, I've heard people say, like, alluding to the dreaded slippery slope when it comes to communism is a common ploy, especially among some conservatives, as well as the slippery slope fallacy. Expressing a concern that something will get out of hand is not always fallacious, but if there's no good evidence to support the claim, then it is a slippery slope. I remember a childhood book or a story that I learned as a kid, and it was something like, if you give a mouse a cookie, I don't know if I really agree with the moral of the story, because in a way it's teaching kids to like think in terms of the slippery slope. But I remember the story saying that if you give the mouse the cookie, it's not going to stop with the cookie, because then he's going to want another cookie, and then he's going to want the whole box, and then eventually he's going to want more than the box. He's going to want to have like his own like section of the house to eat them in, and then he's going to want a bigger part of the house, and then eventually he's going to want the house, and you can just move to the garage or whatever, while the mouse eating cookies just occupies the whole place. So don't take that one step. I don't know, but though, what's the moral? Is it like people will exploit your generosity, so just be careful about being nice? I don't know. I'm trying to understand if I really agree with the point of the story, but I just touch base with it with you guys, since maybe some of you remember it. It kind of reminds us of this fallacy. Okay. I heard it said that if we allow gays to serve openly in the military, which of course now they can, since in 2000 it was under the Obama administration. I don't remember the exact year, but they rescinded the old "don't ask, don't tell" policy. So now gay people can openly serve. Anyway, some people making arguments against it said, well, watch out, because if gay people are allowed to openly serve in the military, that's going to affect the cohesion of the fighting forces. And if that happens, then we're going to have less military readiness and effectiveness, and therefore it's going to put us on a slippery slope towards foreign domination and invasion of the United States at some future time. So let us not go down that path, and make sure we don't take the first step. But that hasn't been shown at all. If anything, there's better recruitment, and you can draw from a bigger base of American citizens when you allow anybody to serve, regardless of their particular orientation or whatever. So, okay, guys. The gateway drug argument is another one. You've heard it said, well, don't take that one little sip of alcohol or whatever it may be, because it may seem like it's just something nice to experiment with right now, but you're going to open the door towards a life of like total addiction, and you'll never be able to have a job or finish school or like have a family. So I would worry, or you might get into legal problems and all the rest. So watch out, even attempting to do a little of that. Not necessarily true, as you guys know. A lot of people have done some of those things without necessarily having their lives collapse or fall apart. Okay, so that's the slippery slope. And now we just come to the end. The last one is the naturalistic fallacy. And what the naturalistic fallacy basically says is that it is the mistaken idea that, or the mistaken assumption that whatever is somehow natural is good, and whatever is somehow described as unnatural must be bad. Okay, so the okay. So there it is, naturalistic fallacy. So like people will make these kind of claims that if something is somehow given to us by nature in whatever way they're describing, then it must be a good thing. And if it's something that's synthetic, man-made, or just something that does not derive from nature itself, then it must be a bad thing. But that's not necessarily true, and you really have to reject this way of thinking. You need to look at things on a case-by-case basis. Can natural things be good? Sure. Can unnatural things be bad? Also, yes, they can be, but not in all cases. So let me give you an example of a couple of things from nature that are just not good at all. Earthquakes, hurricanes, viruses, these things not there to help you. So if you just say such and such comes from nature, so it must be a good thing. No, nature, to be honest, doesn't really care about us at all. Mankind has found extraordinary means by which to overcome the challenges that nature presents us with, whether that's disease, low lifespan, lack of natural habitation or infrastructure. So the world of nature itself, especially when you get back further and further from the modern era, is deadly and it's dangerous. So there's some things, of course, in nature that can be great, but not everything. What if a person says, hey, cocaine, it comes from a little plant, the coca leaf, and that's growing from the ground. It's something that God gave us, so there can't be anything wrong with being on that drug. Well, obviously, it's still very dangerous, whether or not it's something that came from nature or not. If you really think that everything from nature is good, then maybe you've got to roll around in some poison ivy or go, rattle a beehive or something. But nature is not necessarily always going to be a good thing for you in whatever example you're trying to point out. Or someone will say, vaccines, they don't grow on trees, so they must be bad for us. But look, if that's really true, then you need to stop you just turn off this computer that you're watching this on right now, because these computers are definitely not something that comes straight out of nature. And they're a supreme achievement of like human technology and advancement. So you should get rid of all your appliances, stop driving your car, and on and on and on. But obviously, many of the things that we've been able to create that are not natural have, after all, made our lives better, more efficient, and longer lasting. So if you're a fan of nature, then you might want to get infected with viruses. And if you hate things that are unnatural, then definitely don't take vaccines. But this is getting it backwards, right? We're able to overcome some of the things that nature threatens us with and the challenges that it poses to us. On the other hand, of course, there can be things that are natural that are good, unnatural that are bad, but you have to look at things on a case-by-case basis. About to build a cabin in the woods? Sure. I mean, there's nothing wrong with having a cabin in the woods, but we can't just have the broad sweeping assumption that all things found in nature are good. All things found somehow in the man-made world are bad. Look at it. Organ transplants, when those things first started, you had a lot of people saying, oh man, this is like Frankenstein. Mary Shelley actually was writing that book during a time when people were starting to think about these new medical, approaches. But, it's probably the only way that you're going to be able to survive in some cases if you have a fatal kind of organ failure. And there's other kinds of medical treatments, that are, of course, not given by nature, whether it's chemotherapy, radiation. If you want to just take like homeopathic medicines and natural remedies and stuff because you reject these things because they're somehow not natural, then you might actually be eliminating your best case scenario to avoid the worst outcome from the disease. Be a little bit cautious about overly hasty assessments of what's good and bad just based on the idea that it comes from nature or that it doesn't come from nature. And the one other thing I would say about this naturalistic fallacy, just as a philosopher, thinking about it philosophically, I kind of believe that it's not even very well defined, the concept of natural versus the unnatural. Okay? So look, bees, they create beehives. Ants, they create ant colonies. Beavers, working together in big groups, they create dams. So those are just, nobody says those things aren't natural. That's just their form of life and what they do given the tools that nature has given them. But human beings, we have these amazing minds. We have very powerful minds. And so we, humans, create, roads, buildings, technologies, space shuttles, medicines. And so how is it, in my view, different to say that's natural as opposed to the things that other life forms do with regard to the tools given to them by nature? So, I mean, I also feel that the distinction is not necessarily clearly drawn. Where is the line between the natural and the unnatural? How is it a human being creating like medicines is something that's not natural, but, other life forms, when they, like a bird makes a nest or something, nobody says, what is it doing? It's collecting parts of nature and reforming them into something that doesn't exist without the bird doing that. That's natural behavior. So I also have other issues with how do we even express the concept here. Natural, unnatural argument against LGBTQ. Yes, Kylie, that's mentioned in the book too. And it says here, naturalistic fallacy has been used to justify and to criticize homosexuality, as in the following. Homosexual encounters do not lead to children, which is the natural goal of sexual intercourse, and therefore homosexuality is wrong. In a similar manner, a person may argue that hunting is morally acceptable because other animals hunt and kill. However, the fact that other animals are predators does not justify our doing the same. Some animals may eat their young, and a few insects even eat their male partners, but these naturally occurring examples don't imply that it's morally justifiable for us to do the same. So, sometimes marketing of products and services to us rely on this type of fallacy, and this is one that's very prevalent in the world of consumer marketplace, because companies know that, and marketers know that many of us are caught by the grip of this way of thinking, and so that they will try to market us products that somehow have a naturalistic appeal. Like you can even see tobacco products sometimes that say like organic, all naturally grown tobacco, as though that somehow eliminates all the health risks and carcinogens and tar that still do exist in the substance. So, be wise, I guess, as a consumer to the ways that we are sometimes led to accept the naturalistic fallacy by the presentation of the product. Like Coke comes out with like some kind of like, I don't know, more natural version as though it's the best thing ever for you to be drinking, but still is no way that it could compare to the health benefits and etc. of other types of drinks. So, okay, that really covers it, I guess, guys. We're all the way through the set. So that's everything I had for our meeting for today, I guess. We'll be back on Tuesday, and on Tuesday, don't forget you have that second homework assignment due from Chapter 5. Also, I've been replying to emails students gave me about their midterm scores. They've all been graded, and if you want to know your score, it just takes a moment to send me an email, and I'll let you know. It could take me a day or two just because I have a pretty hectic Thursday schedule, but anybody who sends me a message, I always reply within 2 days. So, all right, guys, I guess that's fine. Let's end our meeting for the moment. Thanks so much again, everybody, and have a good weekend to you too. And first, I'll close our Zoom stream, and then I'll close the YouTube. So, till next time, then, thanks so much, and I'll see you guys soon. Okay. And happy Halloween, yeah, for sure. I'm going to try and get a costume. I don't know what it's going to be, but we'll see how it goes. All right, then. Bye-bye. Someone said go as Tetris. That's funny. All right. I'll see you guys then. Take it easy.